Our first two guests are Joey and Holly Baird. Now, they are the founders of the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener. They're a married couple living in southeastern Wisconsin, just outside of Milwaukee. They make videos on YouTube about how to grow your own food organically, reusing found items or items that you might have just considered throwing away, what to do with the food you grow, home canning, and simple home living. I just give you a little backstory before we bring Holly and Joey on. Last year in the fall, I did a ton of cleaning around the house. I was going through the side of the house, and we've got a huge pine tree, and I ended up with about a 4-foot tall, 10-foot wide, a 10-foot long, probably 3 or 4 foot wide stack of pine needles and old rotted out dirt and leaves and what have you, and I ended up getting them into a huge pile, and winter set in too quick for me, and they sat there all winter. And then in the springtime I thought, what am I going to do with all this stuff? Anyway, I convinced Carol to put in a couple of huge beds in the backyard. We dumped all the stuff in there, started planting stuff. It's been an adventure. But, you say, well, what does gardening have to do with Fringe Radio? We're going to talk about a lot of different subjects with Joey and Holly tonight. Chemtrails is something that's always on people's minds. We're going to talk about GMO and heirloom seeds and prepping and all kinds of other stuff. Their website is called the WisconsinVegetableGardener.com. They produce YouTube videos, and I'll tell you, the videos are absolutely television quality documentary style videos. The effort and the work and the filming and all of the post work in there is just amazing, absolutely amazing. So without any further delay, let's get them both on the line. Guys, good evening. Welcome to K-Talk and the Fringe Radio Show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Well, we're honored to have you here tonight. How is the weather up in Wisconsin tonight?
Well, it's getting there. It's a little bit still unseasonably cool. We had about 70 degrees today for the high and about 50 for the low.
So summer is not quite set in yet?
Well, it's Wisconsin summer.
Well, I'm a native Chicagoan, not that far south of Milwaukee, and I know when it sets in with the humidity and everything else to come with it, it can make for some pretty miserable weather.
Yes, it can. Yeah, very much with the humidity.
So anyway, guys, I have been watching your videos for quite some time. Like I mentioned, I ended up cleaning out all my flower beds and around my bushes and stuff, and ended up with, I guess, what you would call a ginormous compost pile. And I was like, I'm going to be filling my garbage cans for the next month and a half trying to get rid of all this stuff, and realized that once it sat there all winter and the rain and the snow and everything sat on it, underneath it produced this unbelievable black, luscious dirt. We ended up putting in a couple of huge, not compared to what you guys have, but 2 20 by 8 foot beds about 2 feet high, just full of dirt and stuff, and then threw more in it and started planting. And I found your videos in the springtime, and I just want to say that you do an awesome job. I have learned so much from watching your stuff, and I have actually told so many other people the quality work that you guys do and explaining things to people is amazing. My hat's off to you.
Well, thank you very much. It's a lot of work, but we really enjoy the positive feedback we get from individuals just like yourself.
So how did you guys get into gardening? How did you get into doing everything that you do?
Well, I grew up on a farm in southern Illinois, so that was just always a way of life to have a garden. That's just what you did on a farm to make ends meet, because farmers are not necessarily rich people. So that's just something we always did on the farm. And Holly, you grew up in Milwaukee.
Yeah, I grew up in Milwaukee, and we had a tiny little garden, about 4x4, but we always just grew tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, beans, and that was pretty much it, and zucchini. But we still did that every spring, through the summer. And then ever since I was tiny, we had a compost pile behind our garage that we put compost in there. We put our food scraps in there from the kitchen, let it break down, add it to our different beds in the, flower beds or even the vegetables. And so that's how I got into gardening.
Now, people, I think that so many they tend to turn away from it. I find that it's I've learned a lot doing this first garden, because this is really I actually had one a couple of years ago that didn't work out too well. I planted a bunch of tomatoes. A couple of days after I planted them, they died. I planted some more, and then I kind of realized, not thinking, not many months before I planted the tomatoes, I hit the whole area. It was a weeded area, and I hit it heavily with Roundup, and obviously I think the Roundup was still remaining because it seemed to take down anything I had. So that was the extent of my gardening. But doing it this year, we've had pretty good success, and I want to, we got a lot, our listeners sent in a ton of questions for you. But it is a fun hobby. It can be expensive. I'm learning that if you're not careful with what you buy, you can end up spending a small fortune. You've got to kind of shop around a little bit. But it's definitely it's self-satisfying, to say the least. And there's nothing like producing your own food.
Right, knowing where that food comes from, knowing that you grew it and you know what you put in the soil. Especially if you have kids. I mean, older individuals may not be that concerned with what they're eating, but if you know what you're feeding your kids, and you know it's all organic and there's no harsh chemicals, or you don't know where it was going in the world and how long it was picked and when it got to your grocery store, it's a very, very rewarding aspect of knowing that food is safe to eat.
Exactly. Now, when you, again, watching all your videos, which way do you kind of push people? If somebody comes up to you, and I know I've seen you've done stuff on local television there and at the fair. Is that true, Kyle? You guys at the Wisconsin State Fair, you won a Best of Show for canning, and we want to definitely talk about that tonight a little bit. But where do you tell people to start? Just start with something small so they have success?
Right. Just start on your level. If you've never gardened before, then you definitely don't want to take something on the size that we have. You want to start small, maybe a 4x4 area, or if you have a patio, you get some containers. And you definitely want to grow what you know you're going to eat. So, don't grow anything. If you don't like okra, don't grow okra. You're just going to waste your time. You want to grow something that you know you're going to eat, and obviously things that are going to grow in your area. For example, in Wisconsin, we could try to grow an avocado tree, but I don't think we'd be very successful. So, so those are the important things: is grow within your limits, grow what you're going to eat, and grow what things that will work for where you are.
Now, when I started my garden out, guys, I actually went out and I've got two big beds, if you will. One, I went out and I bought tomato plants that were already, started. They were probably about a foot and a half tall. Pepper plants, I planted those things. And on the other side, I planted everything seeds, lettuce and, beets and again, all those different type of things. But, again, it is amazing when you throw those seeds in the ground and start to water them. They don't seem to do much for a while, and then all of a sudden you come out there one night after work, and you got green foliage sticking up off the ground out of the dirt. It's amazing how quickly this stuff, how quickly it grows.
Yeah, and that's the thing that we encourage people to understand the plant you're growing. Obviously, if you're wanting to grow radishes and lettuces, that's a cool weather crop. You want to put that in at the appropriate time for the region that you live in. You don't want to try to put a tomato plant in when it's much too cold. There are certain plants that nature designed to grow at certain times, and we as gardeners want to try to push that limit, try to push the weather, when really, no matter what we do, it's hurting ourselves. Just wait until the appropriate time in your area to plant that specific type of vegetable, and the vegetable will take off and grow just fine.
Gotcha. What do you see now? Watching your videos, it seems like for most of your stuff, you start from seeds. Do you, again, I bought my tomato plants already pre-started. What do you for starting seeds? If we could kind of talk about that a little bit, even from an economic standpoint. Obviously, starting from seeds in the winter time or in the early spring in the house. Is got to be probably the most. It's got to be the most economic versus going out buying $2, $3, $4 tomato plants. Is that pretty cost effective? And do people have a lot of? Can you have success starting stuff indoors with seeds?
Yes, you definitely can. And actually, growing up, we would just around here where we are in southeastern Wisconsin, it's real popular for people to start their gardens, to start everything Memorial Day weekend. So growing up, we would just throw the seeds in the ground. We never had starts. We never started seeds. We never occurred to us to go to the garden center and buy, seedlings. We would just put them in the ground. So when I met Joey and he said, I start my seeds ahead of time, I was like, well, that's interesting. I never heard of that before, but it is easy to do, and it's cost effective. And as long as you have a well-draining organic compost to start them in, and you have the, proper containers. I mean, some people just use yogurt containers or sour cream or whatever to start them in, and that's something that you can definitely do. But you definitely want to make sure that you have the space for it and you have the appropriate light, because if you're just sticking them in like a north-facing window, your seeds are going to get what we call leggy, where the stalks grow and they're reaching towards the sun. So you want to make sure you have enough light for them as well.
So do you suggest, Joey, do you suggest building like racks, or how can a person, what would be a good way? Because I want to try seeds. I don't, unfortunately, where I live, I don't have a basement. Our house is a slab, but I do have a kind of a pantry. I'm going to have a pantry area with a window in it, and I'm thinking that I could probably, get some stuff around the window. But if you don't have the window, can you use artificial light? Is it possible to do that in a basement or in a corner?
Absolutely, artificial light. You want to get grow lights. That's the term in the industry. And you want it to be if it's in a basement, you want there to be a room of some sort, or you want it to be warm enough for the seed to germinate. Obviously, if the basement's 35 degrees, it's not going to work. You want to mimic as if the seed was setting outside at the appropriate time of year, and that soil temperature is at 50 to 70 degrees based on the type of seed that you're growing. Whatever you can put grow lights and then put the seeds on the rack. It'll work very successfully. And you can do it in the side of your bedroom. You can do it in a pantry.
It seems like a lot of people will do it like in those 3-season porches, as long as you want to make sure that it's not going to be too cold either. But if you live in a warmer, more mild climate, you can definitely utilize one of those.
And people say, well, should you start seeds or can I buy starts? Some of the biggest gardeners in the world only use starts because they don't have the time or the space to do everything from seed. And other people strictly only start from seed. So there's no wrong way.
Or some people just throw their seeds in the ground.
And throw some seeds in the ground. There's no wrong way to do it as long as you're making the conscious effort to grow your own food and knowing what's going in the soil and what that food has in it when you're eating it.
Gotcha. So let's talk about seeds and stuff like that, because I've got a bunch of questions for you. And, of course, Holly, I want to thank you for sending a bunch of notes to cover. When I went to my garden center this year, I mean, it was kind of cool because there was just rows and rows and rows of stuff. And, of course, we picked out the things that we like to eat. Now, again, as a first-time gardener, I think the mistake I made, and I know I made the mistake, I'm actually going to do a video or two and maybe let you guys see it. I was like, well, I love radishes. So instead of buying one pack of radishes, I bought like 3 or 4, and Carol, my wife, she's like, I think you're putting them down a little too heavy. And they popped up, and they're kind of crowded all over each other, so I'm hoping that they'll do okay. But in looking at the garden center at all these different seeds, I saw something called heirloom seeds, and they were quite a bit more money. What is a heirloom seed?
Okay, so heirloom seeds are kind of like if you think about an heirloom, like a family heirloom. It's something that's been passed down from generation to generation. So heirloom seeds are the original seeds. They are the original seeds, the original varieties that have been around for hundreds of years. So, for example, there's
Brandywine.
Yeah, pink Brandywine tomatoes are heirloom tomatoes. Any Brandywine tomato. But those seeds have been passed on. Our grandparents may have grown them. Their grandparents may have grown them. So they've been passed on for many years. That's what an heirloom seed is. There's been any cross hybridization or anything like that has been done to that seed.
So that's kind of like, again, like you said, a tomato plant that maybe George Washington had in his garden a couple hundred years ago. It's the same seed that goes into the ground that creates a plant that creates tomatoes, which creates more seeds and just keeps moving on and on and on.
It'd probably be more or less Thomas Jefferson as opposed to George Washington, but yeah.
Gotcha. So, what is the advantage of a heirloom seed? Is it just is it going to produce a plant that, you know, maybe in the tomato category, it's going to have a unique taste to it? What's the difference between, like, I could be wrong, but I thought I saw something like the big boy tomato seed and then a big boy heirloom seed. Or maybe I read it wrong. I don't know. Or the heirloom seeds, just very, very unique things.
They just have, we all think that they have a much richer taste, especially the tomatoes. And typically, they may not, so if you plant like 3 tomato seeds of heirloom versus 3 hybrid tomato seeds, maybe 2 of the heirloom will come up, and all 3 of the hybrid will come up. So there's kind of a survival of the fittest going on with the heirloom. But when you do get those plants to start and they're doing well, they're gonna produce really well for you. But they're not hybridized to grow successfully. You know, it's not like you could, you know, maybe sometimes those hybrid seeds, you could put them in some rocky clay soil, they're going to grow. Heirlooms require a little bit more work, but they're worth it because the taste is a lot better, they're beautiful, and they make, you know, good tomato-based products.
And it's not just tomatoes. There's heirloom seeds of all varieties of vegetables.
Corn, leeks. You know,
so it's a specific vegetable. It's going to give you it's going to have maybe a specific color, a specific taste and texture.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. The hybridization, and there's nothing wrong with getting hybrid seeds. All the hybrid nurseries have said, okay, plant A is very drought tolerant and plant B is very heavy producer. So we're going to cross those 2 together, so we can get a plant that's a heavy producer that's drought tolerant. That's all it is. It's nothing, no laboratorial genetically modification of the seed. And nature's been hybridizing plants for years, and that's now what we've got plants to be in nature.
Gotcha. So let's say now, like this year, I bought my plants. They produced fruit. I'm actually getting tomatoes. I was surprised. It literally, I don't have, again, the size garden you have, but I check the plants out all the time. I was surprised that within 2 weeks I already got tomatoes popping out. At the end of the season, you know, my tomatoes grow. I harvest them. How do I get seeds, guys, for next year if I want to get them out of my own plants? Let's say a tomato. How would I do that?
Okay, your best type of seeds is the heirloom. Obviously, you can save hybrid seeds. They will produce a tomato next year, but they won't produce the true tomato like the mother plant did this year. Heirloom seeds will. You can save those seeds. What you do is you take the tomato, cut it in half, put it in a mason jar or half of a milk jug, put a little bit of water on it, squeeze the seeds out, and you're going to let that ferment for a couple of days. You're going to see a nasty mold and maybe a little smell, so you might not want to keep it, you know, next to where visitors are coming in.
Right.
But after a couple of days, once you smell that fragrance, you want to rinse the seeds out through on a screen, and let all the liquid go and keep the seeds and clean the seeds up. And let those dry, and then those will be your seeds for next year.
So then is it a good idea to like put them in an envelope or something like that and mark them and put them away, and then will they keep?
Yeah, you want to keep them in a cool, dry place. So
okay.
And label everything as you're doing it, because all 23 varieties of tomato seeds all look the same.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to keep them, like I said, in a cool, dry place. We keep ours in like little zip top bags. That's what we found works the best for us. You don't want to necessarily put them in like the fridge, but if you have like a closet or something that you can put them in, or a pantry.
And that's really gardener's choice. Many gardeners will put them in the fridge.
Yeah.
That's something that we've never found that's either helped us or hurt us in any way. We just keep them in a cool, dry place, and they work very well the next year.
Now, will most of our plants in the garden, like again in my garden, I'm going to have onions, and I've got beets and carrots and lettuce and cabbage and again not potatoes but tomatoes and peppers. Will pretty much all of the vegetables that you grow, that people grow in their gardens, will they all produce seeds that you can come? I mean, like lettuce. Where do you get where do the lettuce seeds come from?
So what happens is when you plant lettuce, if you don't harvest it right away,
Okay.
it will, what we say, called go to seed.
Or both.
Or both. So all of a sudden you'll see flowers at the top of where your lettuce is. And this is happening actually in our garden right now. We planted lettuce, we didn't eat it all, and so we let some of it go to seed.
And a lot of these plants will naturally do this because they are designed, they're cool weather crops, they don't grow well in the heat. And when the roots reach a certain temperature, that indicates to the plant, hey, it's getting to summer, I've got to put seeds on, and it instantly throws a seed pod on. Go ahead.
Right, so it throws a seed pod on. Now, some plants will do this throughout the summer. Some plants are biannual, so like onions and leeks, carrots, and even parsnips. They're going to take, not the first year they're not going to get the seeds, but the second year you will.
So you want to leave those in the ground. Cabbage, broccoli,
right.
Cauliflower, all the same. So you don't do anything with that plant. Just let it go, act like it's not there. Next year, if you have a very mild or not deadly winter like we had, they'll come back, they'll put flowers on as soon as it's warm, and those flowers will turn to seed pods, and that's where you'll get your seeds from.
Very interesting. Very interesting. We had one of our listeners send a comment in for you and said she lives in Los Angeles. Says in the last couple of years, people in Los Angeles have been going to upscale restaurants, and they were secretly taking the seeds out of the tomatoes, putting them in their napkins for home gardens.
Yeah, and there's been many YouTube videos where that people will go to Chuck E. Cheese and whatever and see a tomato or see a pepper, and they'll pluck the seeds out and they'll take them home and grow them just to see what type of tomato or pepper or other type of seeds that may be in it. Yeah, that's nothing uncommon to some of the more creative gardeners out there.
Now, let me ask you, Joey, does Chuck E. Cheese or some of these restaurants, could they have their own, I don't want to call it a strain, but could they have their own brand of tomato seed, or is it just one of the 23 and you just you happen to get a taste of that?
It's typically they are hybrid tomatoes based on the commercial growing. The hybrid plants are determinate plants. There's two different types of categories of tomatoes. There's determinate, which they grow to a certain height, put all their fruit on, and then that's it. And indeterminate, which they grow indefinitely until it gets too cold, and they'll keep producing until that plant dies. In commercial farming for tomatoes, the majority of those are hybrid determinate tomatoes. So they all grow to a certain height. Right before they turn, they'll come in with a machine, mow them all down, ship them to the restaurant. By the time they get to the restaurant, they pick them green. By the time they get to the restaurant, they are that pinkish hue color, and they taste like cardboard. So everybody gets the same type of tomatoes, and that field is done, and that's the end of the story with the tomatoes.
But if you're in an upscale restaurant, they may have from a local farmer, or farmer's market, whatever. But something like Chuck E. Cheese, I'm assuming that their tomato sauce for the pizza just comes out of a can or whatever. I don't think that they make their own tomato sauce at Chuck E. Cheese. Maybe it was bad, I really don't think so. But like the lady from Los Angeles said, yeah, I could see people going to an upscale restaurant and doing that because they may get those tomatoes from
heirloom variety tomatoes.
Yeah.
Very, very tasty in those upscale restaurants. A lot of those chefs will seek out individual farmers or large gardeners the access to those heirloom variety vegetables.
Gotcha. Carl sent in a question for you guys and says, Joey and Holly, could you explain what a hothouse fruit or vegetable or a hothouse tomato is?
It's basically greenhouse grown.
Yeah, it's grown in a controlled environment in a giant greenhouse that's climate controlled, and that's what a lot of how you get a lot of tomatoes that are hothouse grown from Canada over the winter when we don't have a whole lot of access to good organic, non-chemical based tomatoes.
And a lot of them are grown hydroponically, which is how the roots are put in the water and they add the nutrients to the water. It seems that happens out in Canada and also I believe on the West Coast as well. So our one grocery store around here has a lot of those hothouse or greenhouse grown or hydroponically grown, and those seem to have not as good of a taste as a garden tomato, but they have a pretty good taste for a store tomato.
And there's nothing wrong with eating them. There's nothing chemically wrong with them.
Right. Now, isn't the ones that are grown with aquaponics, is that where they, I could be wrong, maybe you could correct me, is that where they basically have these big PVC tubes and it looks like PVC piping running all over, and the plants are actually sticking out of the piping and they're pumping like a slurry of sorts through it?
That's correct. That's aquaponics, or that's hydroponics. Aquaponics is the practice of having a reservoir of fish, and then they'll use that fish water and run through the tubing for the plants to pick up the nutrients that way too. So hydroponics, water with nutrients; aquaponics, water with fish fish by manure, I guess.
Basically, yeah, fish waste.
Fish waste, and the plants grow that way. So there's two different methods, but yeah.
Because, it is interesting. There's nothing like a garden fresh tomato. Sometimes, especially in the winter, when you can't find nothing, of course, like to make salads and stuff like that. But there's just some of these tomatoes, and tomato, I think, has got to be the most popular thing people are growing. Sometimes they absolutely are just tasteless. It's just like, you have to more or less tell yourself, mentally that you're eating a tomato, because some of them, in the wintertime at least, they've just got no taste. They're so bland.
Right. And, the tomatoes I buy at the store that have the best taste are usually like the Romas or the on the vine ones. Those are the ones that usually have the best taste for store-bought tomatoes, in February or whatever. But like you said, nothing compares to a homegrown tomato. But you can also, sometimes if you even just hold up the tomato, you can smell it. And sometimes you can smell if it's going to have, like the on the vine tomatoes that you can buy, they seem to have like that nice tomato smell, fragrance, sorry, as opposed to, whatever else you buy. And sometimes, it depends on where you live. Maybe you don't have that option, but luckily we have a few different stores here, and we have some tomato choices. But still, I would much rather have a tomato out of the garden as opposed to from Canada or wherever it comes from.
Gotcha. We've got to take a commercial break in just a minute or two to help pay for the light bill here. Our guest tonight is Holly and Joey Baird. Go check out their website at the WisconsinVegetableGardener.com. They've got their links on there for all their YouTube stuff, and like I said, their videos, their website has just got so many great things. And we're going to talk about a lot of this stuff tonight. But go check out the videos. You can learn so much and have some success. And we actually had some people send in some comments about some different gardens that they've grown, and we'll pass them all on to you. So stick around, get a little something to drink. We're going to be back with Joey and Holly in just a minute. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Fringe Radio Show. Our guests tonight for the first part of the show is Holly and Joey Baird. Again, guys, thank you so much for giving up your Saturday night and educating us and the listeners.
Our pleasure, helping people grow their own food. That it's well worth our time. It
is. We've got a bunch of questions for you and a bunch of different things we want to touch on. Let's go ahead and ask. This is the question that came in. It said, can Holly and Joey explain why some plants' seeds won't be true to seed? At what point does hybridization cause plant seeds to regress?
Well, hybridization is the crossing of two plants, and it gives an offspring of a different plant, and that different plant is the best traits of plant A and plant B. You can replant that seed and you'll get a tomato plant, an onion, whatever, the pepper plant, whatever the case may be. But to get back to the true parent plant, you're going to have to plant that seed or re-say that seed about 4 to 6 generations before you really get back to what that seed truly was at the beginning before this hybridization took place.
Gotcha. Another question from our friend Bill in upstate New York says, guys, what are some ways to compensate for drought-stricken areas where there's just such a terrible lack of rain?
Well, rain barrels are a great necessity for a home gardener. Now, there are some cities and municipalities that unfortunately have banned the use of rainwater collection in rain barrels. And then there's some that are trying to tax the amount of water that falls on your property, which that's horrible too, because rain should be free for all of us. Another method is there's a device called the rain saucer. Now, that's not, you don't have to tie this into a gutter system. This can also work well if you're on a rooftop, or just put it in the back garden. It collects, for every 1 inch of rain, it collects about 10 gallons of water. What are some other methods, Holly, that you think that would work well for rain? You can grow.
I know there's rain gardens. People will grow gardens specifically for rain collection,
right.
and they're generally growing at a lower level at the bottom of a hill, but you don't want it to be a steep hill because you don't want to wash your plants away. But that basically at the bottom of a slope. So people do that, and there's also, you can look into plants that survive drought better than as opposed to, drought-tolerant plants, drought-tolerant vegetables, things like that are going to do better than as opposed to growing a variety. You may have to grow some drought-specific items.
Now, we had a friend, he's in Pennsylvania, New York. He had a garden, and he didn't water his garden at all. Mm-hmm. And they had a severe drought, and I think all but one of his zucchini plants survived. Well, the goal was to figure out which of the zucchini plants or which of the plants were the most strongest. So he saved those seeds from that zucchini plant that didn't die because of that drought. And what happens to seeds in plants like in that situation is they become climatized to where that seed is more tolerable to the conditions that you are growing it in your garden versus if you bought a seed from your local home and garden center that was initially grown in Florida or South Carolina or Missouri. The seeds you save become climatized to the area that you're growing, which they are more tolerant of the conditions and potentially can be more successful at producing food for you.
Gotcha. Well, you know what? It's so interesting that you mentioned, and actually this whole subject of drought-stricken areas out here in Utah. We have, of course, we're in the desert. I mean, we're actually in the Wasatch Valley. The whole Wasatch Valley or the Utah Valley and the Salt Lake Valley are in a desert area. And what we're seeing happening out here, people, of course, are building new homes and they're putting in these lawns. And what we're tending to see here is instead of the traditional sprinkler systems, where the heads pop up and spray all over the place, they're now putting these like drip systems right underneath the ground, underneath the sod. And the lawns, even on the hottest of days, are the darkest of greens. They're wet, but they're watered from underneath. And from what I understand, that significantly, if you can water underground versus above ground, can save quite the plant takes more advantage of it, and you don't lose so much through evaporation.
Right, and there's also, that's called drip irrigation. A lot of people will use that in their garden, especially if they're doing a raised bed situation. Those are easy to install. There's also something, and this has been used for many, many years. It's called an Oya, and it's spelled O-L-L-A, and it's made out of a porous clay, and you bury it below the soil, and it's basically like in the shape of a balloon. So imagine if you took a balloon, turned it upside down, so that the bottom part was in the soil and the top part where you could water it. And then at that point, the soil kind of sucks the water out as it needs it. And a lot of people in drier climates use these since, before the United States was founded. And like I said, they're called Oyas, and you can make your own pretty easy out of some terracotta pots, but you can also purchase them online. And that's something else you can do. You can bury the Oya into your garden or your raised bed or whatever, and then the soil will take the water, or the plants will take the water as it needs it.
Gotcha. Very interesting. Bill again writes in for you guys. This is, Holly and Joey, do you believe that global warming is affecting our agriculture and may require people to start gardens to compensate for the costs at the supermarkets?
Well, obviously, as you can tell, the food prices are going up, and I don't know if it's necessarily due to global warming or climate change, but it's definitely due to, I believe, because of the overuse of fossil fuels, and because fossil fuels are being overused, I think that contributes to climate change. There's no denying that the ice caps are melting, so that's causing the sea levels to rise. It's causing the major fluctuations in the change of climate. But this has happened before. It also doesn't help that we have 7 billion people on Earth.
Right.
So if you take that all into effect.
But if you grow organically, we could sustain a population of about 9 to 12 billion people currently, as we said right now. If we all went turn the switch to organic, we could sustain that kind of population.
Right, and that's just it, is that organic is where you want to be, where you want to encourage others to be, is because what people don't realize is that, the average American meal travels 1,500 miles from farm to plate. So if you think about just growing, just a 4x8 bed in your backyard, you can help cut down some of that, or by going to the farmer's market, or subscribing to a CSA, or finding a local farmer to get your meat from. That all helps cut down the use of fossil fuels, which does contribute to the ozone, to the reason why, we're having the climate change happen.
Right, exactly. One thing you mentioned about like the rain barrels, one thing that we've had here where we live in unincorporated Salt Lake County. So we're actually in Salt Lake City, but we're in an unincorporated part of the county where there's not a lot of rules. But our other home that we had that was about 7 miles south, we were in a suburb that they specifically did not allow you to capture or store rainwater. Now, I don't know if they felt it was because people were going to capture it and try to use it for drinking. Have you heard of that being a problem where some municipalities are very strict or maybe have some rules out there about capturing water, guys?
Yeah, we have. We've heard it from people in your area. We've heard it from people in Oregon, Washington State. It seems, I don't know if it's just the area over there or what it is, but yeah, we've heard of people not being able to capture the rainwater. The municipalities usually don't state why. I don't know if it's because they feel it's unsanitary, or if they feel that, like you said, that.
Well, if I'm collecting my own rainwater, I'm not purchasing water from municipalities, right. So somebody's losing money, and right. It all comes down to money, and that's what makes the world go round, whether you like it or not.
Right.
But then some of it was also the method. People were building like reservoirs that weren't approved by the city and things like that also. So. You also want to, if you're going to use a rain barrel, if you're going to collect rainwater, you want to do it within your limits of what you have to do.
And some people will go to the extreme of camouflaging a rain barrel, putting it in the center of a bunch of bushes, or even burying it mm-hmm. to allow the water to capture that way. So if somebody came back to say, hey, I've heard you capturing rainwater, and there's no barrel because it's buried underground, that inspector is never going to know that. So there are ways around it if you want to play the system.
Gotcha. Now, I was watching one of your episodes, speaking of government involvement, I was watching one of your episodes that you recorded, and I believe you were growing beets out in the front yard, and you mentioned along the lines, and I think probably a lot of homeowners experience this depending where they're at. There's some places you can't have a vegetable garden in the front yard. Isn't that true?
Yeah, homeowners associations are a horrible thing for this country. They dictate the rules because everybody's lawn has got to be perfect. It's got to be manicured because that's the way American lawn should be. In some areas, you can get away with planting items that most people wouldn't know what they were in the front yard that are decorative, such as Swiss chard, rainbow Swiss chard. Right. You can grow that. Strawberries, if people really don't know what a strawberry plant looks like, you could potentially get away with that.
It's called edible landscaping. Yeah. And yeah, you can get away with it. But and there's people that's all the space they have is their front yard. Right. Maybe their backyard has a big tree in it. They don't get enough sunlight. It's just not ideal conditions, or the dog uses the backyard or whatever. And it's unfortunate, but if you are concerned and say you are buying a house in a suburb or a subdivision, then that's something you want to look into. Can I have a front yard garden? I know if we were to move and to purchase a house somewhere else, we would be very specific about what we were getting ourselves into, because we would utilize our plot more than we would just for laying on the green grass. So.
Right. Well, yeah. Again, if you and it's up to people. Like if they want to have that manicured lawn and the perfect looking bushes, hey, more power to them. But it is. I think it is so cool to for families to teach their kids, especially about gardening, to be able to grow their own food. I've also understood, as far as freedom to grow your own food, there are some countries in the world that you can't do that. I don't know any specifics, but I know I've come across that once or twice where maybe I shouldn't say it's not that you can't do it, but you have to have permission to do it. We're here in the United States, for the most part, we can do what we want on our own property, for the most part.
Right. Now, first, we're far too young to remember this. For some of your listeners, after World War II, when the troops came back, the government encouraged people to grow their own food. Enduring. And now it's gotten to the point where the government's discouraging people to grow their own food, because if the government can control the food, the government can control the people.
Yeah, that's true. That's very, very true. If they can keep you hungry, they can keep you in check.
Oh, exactly. That's just it. And the same thing like them sending our chicken to China to get it processed. I don't even know why is it going to China and what's happening while it's there. That's just odd to me. And then things like genetically modified organisms or genetically engineered food, there was no research done on the impacts it could have on your health. And I guarantee that the reason why the government doesn't necessarily want people growing their own food is because they want to feed these genetically engineered seeds and food and wherever else, because that might cause people to have cancer, and there might be a way to control the population. I feel a lot of this is population control involved. So it's just, that's what Joey and I believe, but you can do your own research, but I think that's what a lot of it comes down to. Same thing with, Roundup. People don't realize when they spray Roundup on their lawn, once it hits about 75 degrees and ideal humidity, that does not stay on your lawn. It starts to flow into the air. And then once it's into the air, it can go just about anywhere.
Right. Well, we've got an NBC news break coming up in just a little bit. Can we keep you guys for another go-around?
Absolutely.
And when we come back, we'd like to talk about GMO versus non-GMO and the whole Monsanto movement. I find it so interesting, and we'll talk more about gardening and a little bit of prepping, and we've got and canning for sure. I've got a lot of questions that were sent in, and we want to get them posted up to you guys tonight. Our guests tonight on Fringe Radio is Joey and Holly Baird. Again, they are the founders of the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener. You can go check out their website at thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com. And I encourage anybody who has a desire to grow their own food, even if it's a small container garden. It doesn't take a lot. It's amazing what one tomato plant in the right type of soil can yield. You can enjoy delicious vegetables and feed your family. And again, we're going to talk about canning and preserving stuff.